Chance to air your question or comment. We're glad you were watching, and we certainly want you to stay tuned to CNN. We'll always have the latest developments for you on America's new war coming up right now.
Investigators in the United States claim progress, the discovery of clues from the cockpits, and one significant arrest. All the while, exhausted workers at Ground Zero in New York get a boost from the president turned motivator-in-chief.
And in moments of silence, in moments of song, the world takes time to remember.
Hello and welcome. I'm Jim Clancy.
And I'm Colleen McEdwards at CNN Center. This is CNN's continuing coverage of America's new war. We've got a couple of late developments to tell you about right now in the ongoing investigation into the terrorist attacks against the United States. Search crews have recovered the cockpit voice recorder from the hijacked United Airlines flight that crashed in Pennsylvania on Tuesday. Authorities are hoping that the device will shed some light on what happened in the moments just before the crash. The recorder is said to be in, quote, fairly good shape. And in another development as well, authorities made their first arrest in direct connection to the terrorist attacks. The Justice Department says the man is a material witness in the case. Well, it has been nearly 4 days since the attacks now, and around-the-clock rescue operations have continued. Despite some rainy weather Friday, you're looking at a live shot of the scene in New York right there. Workers still digging through that mountain of destruction. They say they're hoping for miracles. And for the rescue workers, the continued operations are physically draining, as you can imagine. And on Friday, rescuers in New York got a huge morale boost and a bit of a break from U.S. President George W. Bush. Mr. Bush got a first-hand look as well at the devastation, and afterwards thanked the rescuers for all their efforts.
I'm shocked at the size of the devastation, and it's hard to describe what it's like to see the gnarled steel and broken glass and twists the building silhouetted against smoke. I said that this was the first act of war on America in the 21st century, and I was right, particularly having seen the scene.
Friday, also a day of prayer and remembrance. 4 former American presidents joined Mr. Bush in prayer at the National Cathedral. Similar scenes of prayer and candlelight vigils were played out across the country and around the world all throughout the day.
Well, let's take a look now at the rapidly moving investigation. The FBI saying it now has 36,000 leads in this case. At least 27 people have been detained by the U.S. Immigration Service. And within the past few hours, the first arrest. CNN Justice correspondent Kelly Arena following that story.
The first arrest has been made in direct connection to Tuesday's terrorist attacks, that according to law enforcement officials. Now, an individual that was detained at JFK Airport in New York is in custody on a material witness warrant. Now, we don't have any more specifics at this point, but a material witness warrant is issued when it can be demonstrated that there is information that's highly relevant to a criminal investigation and when there is a risk of flight. Law enforcement sources say to expect much more such arrests in coming days. Now, sources say that at least 2 people in custody have provided what they describe as very useful and helpful information in moving this investigation forward. The FBI says that it has issued 35 search warrants, hundreds of subpoenas. It has seized computers and other material, and it's following up thousands of leads both in the U.S. and abroad. Sources also say that there are currently 27 individuals in custody on immigration violations who may or may not know anything about the incidents. Investigators have also put out a so-called watch list informing various authorities, including Border Patrol and the FAA, about 150 individuals the FBI says may have information that could be helpful in the investigation. Now, if those people are found, they will be detained for questioning.
A senior defense official has told CNN 2 of the names of suspected hijackers match the names of people who attended U.S. military schools. Now, the schools are the Defense Language Academy at Lackland Air Force Base in Texas and the Air War College in Montgomery, Alabama. Pentagon officials caution the matching names could be just a coincidence. CNN national correspondent Mike Betcher has the details of what else investigators are learning about the moments that were leading up to the attacks.
4,000 special agents chasing 36,000 leads and circulating to 18,000 law enforcement agencies a growing list of people they want to question.
The Federal Bureau of Investigation has also forwarded a list of more than 100 names to numerous law enforcement organizations. These are the names of individuals the FBI would like to talk to because we believe they may have information that could be helpful to the investigation.
Another FBI list, this one made public, the 19 men who the FBI says were the hijackers of the 4 aircraft. 7 of the men were pilots, according to CNN terrorism analyst Peter Bergen. 13 of them have recognizable Saudi tribal names from the west and southwest of Saudi Arabia, an area where bin Laden has recruited.
According to a source familiar with the bin Laden organization, men returning from Afghanistan who had trained with bin Laden arrived in Saudi Arabia in recent weeks and were talking about some kind of big operation that was imminent.
The FBI searched this apartment in San Diego, where in those final stages, Monday before the attack, 3 men left town in a hurry.
They had the truck right here, they was moving out. Did that seem unusual to you in any way? I mean, I never seen nobody move at midnight.
The trail of another accused hijacker, Mohammed Atta, in the months before the attack, led from Hamburg, Germany, to Florida and a series of flight schools, rental car agencies, and apartments. Then back to Hamburg, a return to Florida, and a final trip to New England, where he boarded a Boston to Los Angeles flight that eventually crashed into the World Trade Center. U.S. intelligence sources tell CNN the entire terrorist operation required so many people and special skills that they believe several terrorist groups had to be involved. Egyptian Islamic Jihad, led by this man, Ayman Zawahiri, a close bin Laden associate, is one of the groups getting close scrutiny by U.S. analysts. They were photographed together about 3 years ago in Afghanistan. A second man who has not been seen in more than 20 years is also being scrutinized. Imad Mughniya, who is suspected by U.S. officials of masterminding a string of terrorism attacks against Americans, including the 1983 suicide bombing of the U.S. Marine barracks in Beirut that killed 241, has had numerous contacts with bin Laden since 1994, including face-to-face contact in the Sudan at an Islamic conference. This, according to Western and Mideast intelligence sources. A founding member of Lebanese Hezbollah, Mughniya is believed living in Iran. U.S. officials remain convinced that bin Laden was behind Tuesday's attack, but believe the day's mega-terrorism marked the debut of a new, larger, and more dangerous organization, a group with many heads and many faces. Mike Betcher, CNN, Atlanta.
On Friday, President Bush led a day of prayer at the National Cathedral in Washington. Mr. Bush then traveled to New York City, touring the wreckage that was the World Trade Center. CNN senior White House correspondent John King recaps the president's emotional day and looks at some of the tough decisions that are still ahead of him.
A first-hand look at the worst of the devastation and a pep talk that included a promise to those pulling the dead from the rubble.
I can hear you. I can hear you. The rest of the world hears you. And the people who knocked these buildings down will hear all of us soon.
After his emotional tour of New York, Mr. Bush was asked if he knew who was responsible.
We know we got a suspect.
But lead suspect Osama bin Laden is an elusive target, and aides say one of the president's greatest challenges is convincing an angry nation to be patient.
This conflict was begun on the timing and terms of others. It will end in a way and at an hour of our choosing.
Mr. Bush declared a national emergency and authorized a call-up of the National Guard and reservists. And Congress passed a resolution authorizing the president to use all necessary and appropriate force to retaliate. Senior officials say they do not rule out a first wave of military strikes in the near future. But Mr. Bush is asking his national security team and other world leaders to develop a long-range plan. For example, sources tell CNN the president is asking the leaders of Canada, France, Germany, Britain, and other nations to do more to break up terrorist cells in their countries, and asking Saudi Arabia and other moderate Arab nations to crack down on bin Laden's financial supporters and to take a tougher line with the Taliban in Afghanistan.
In our response, we will have to take into account not only the perpetrators, but those who provide haven, support, inspiration, financial, and other assets to the perpetrators.
Mr. Bush also led the nation in a day of prayer and remembrance, with former presidents, the cabinet, and the Congress joining in.
Grief and tragedy and hatred are only for a time. Goodness, remembrance, and love have no end. And the Lord of life holds all who die and all who mourn.
Consoling the nation is another role for a president at times of crisis, and a father who knows the strains of the job well gave his son a supportive tap.
Administration sources say weekend national security meetings will focus on options for responding, and senior officials tell CNN they enter those talks with one encouraging development. Pakistan, which borders Afghanistan, has now promised to fully cooperate in any U.S. operations. John King, CNN, the White House.
Well, the U.S. Congress has taken quick action on a number of issues arising out of all of this. Some of that action actually just a short time ago. So let's turn now to CNN's Major Garrett in Washington for the very latest. Major?
Well, Colleen, the United States Congress, House of Representatives, and the Senate today passed nearly unanimously. It was unanimously in the Senate, only one no vote in the House of Representatives, resolutions authorizing the use of force, giving the president full legal authority to prosecute any military campaign against those thought to be responsible and found to be responsible for the terrorist attacks on September 11th. In the negotiations with Congress, the Bush White House had pressed for wider authority to deal with and to obtain that legal authority to prosecute any war against future attacks against the United States of a terrorist nature. Congress decided not to give the president that wide authority. What they wanted to do was maintain their congressional prerogatives to maintain a legal authority declaration only for those thought responsible for the attacks on September 11th, telling the White House, if there are more attacks and you need more authority, come back and we'll talk to you about that then. Colleen?
And what does that say, Major, about the process here?
Well, what it says is that Congress, even at a time of national crisis such as this, wants to maintain its prerogatives outlined in the Constitution. The President, as Commander-in-Chief, of course, has the legal authority to prosecute a war, but only with congressional approval. And Congress has been very aggressive in protecting that constitutional prerogative, and was so in this case. There was a good deal of a back-and-forth negotiating between the White House and Congress over the exact wording of this use of force resolution. As I said, the White House wanted broader authority. Congress said, no, we will give you full authority to use whatever military means you deem necessary to deal with those who perpetrated the attacks on September 11th. If, in fact, there are additional attacks, we'll discuss and provide you the authority to deal with those, but we do not want to give you the power to anticipate those types of attacks and use authority we're not prepared yet to grant you.
Understood. CNN's Major Garrett in Washington for us. Thanks. Jim?
Well, Colleen, back in New York, the images coming in continue to increase the sense of surrealism around the site of this attack. These latest pictures were shot Friday by an amateur photographer. Now, he was led through the area near the World Trade Center.
Everyone just grabbed their kids and ran. Left their goddamn carriages.